My husband was standing at the foot of my hospital bed when I opened my eyes. He wasn't holding my hand. He was on the phone, speaking in a low voice, and the first word I heard him say was, "Yet." Not "she's awake," not "thank God," yet. I didn't move. I kept my breathing slow and shallow, the way I used to do as a child when I heard my stepfather come home drunk and I needed him to think I was asleep. Something ancient and survival-coded in my brain told me to stay still, to listen, to not let him know I was conscious. He turned slightly toward the window, dropping his voice further. He told whoever was on the other end that the doctors said it could be another few days. He said the paperwork was almost ready. He said not to worry, that by the time anyone figured out what happened, everything would already be in his name. He hung up, smoothed his jacket, and walked out of the room without once looking at me. I lay there for a long time after he left, staring at the ceiling tiles. My body felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. My hands had tremors I didn't recognize. My hair had been falling out in clumps for 3 months, and every doctor I'd seen had blamed it on stress, on my diet, on being a 32-year-old woman who worked too hard and slept too little. Nobody had thought to check whether my husband of 4 years had been putting something in my coffee every morning before he handed it to me with a smile. I'm Claire. I'm a senior financial analyst at a consulting firm in Atlanta, and I understand numbers the way some people understand music intuitively, structurally, always looking for what doesn't add up. I should have caught this sooner. I think about that a lot. I should have caught this so much sooner. But the thing about being poisoned by someone you love is that your brain works against you. Every symptom gets explained away. Every red flag gets rationalized. Because the alternative that the man who kisses you goodbye every morning has been slowly dismantling your nervous system is so monstrous that your mind simply refuses to compute it. The toxicology report that finally broke everything open wasn't even ordered for me. It was ordered for our dog. Biscuit had started having seizures 6 weeks before I ended up in the hospital. My vet ran a full panel and called me on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice careful and measured, asking if there was any chance Biscuit had gotten into any cleaning products or garden chemicals. The levels in his blood work were consistent with thallium exposure. Thallium, a heavy metal used in rat poison. Odorless, tasteless, accumulates slowly. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot of the vet's office, the word thallium echoing in my head, and feeling something cold and terrible begin to crystallize. I did not go home that night. I called my college roommate instead, drove to her apartment across town, and the next morning I walked into my own doctor's office and asked for a full heavy metals panel. Not because I was certain, but because I was finally willing to be wrong about the man I had married. The results came back in 48 hours. My thallium levels were not just elevated. They were at a concentration that my doctor, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Okafor, who had known me for 6 years, described as consistent with prolonged intentional exposure. She said the word intentional very carefully, like she was handing me something fragile. I did not cry. I went completely still. And then I started thinking. I had watched my husband for 4 years and never once suspected him of being capable of this. But when I went back through my memories with this new lens, things I had explained away began to rearrange themselves into something ugly and deliberate. The way he had insisted on making my coffee every single morning, even on weekends. Even when I offered to do it myself, he called it a love language. The way Biscuit only got sick after my husband started watching him more when I traveled for work. The way my symptoms always peaked on Monday mornings after he'd had the whole weekend to dose me. The pattern was there. I just hadn't known what I was looking at. What I knew about my husband was this. We had bought our house together 2 years ago, but the mortgage and the deed were in my name alone, because his credit had been damaged by a failed business venture before we met. He had been pushing for 6 months to have the deed transferred to joint ownership. I had been dragging my feet because something low and instinctual in me kept finding reasons to delay. He had framed my hesitation as a lack of trust. I had felt guilty about it. I had been on the verge of finally just doing it to prove I wasn't holding his past against him. The house was worth $680,000. His salary, which I had been quietly supplementing for 2 years without complaint, barely covered his car payment. If I became incapacitated, if I was declared mentally incompetent, or if I died, and he had power of attorney, which he did, because I had trusted him and we had done estate planning together like responsible adults, he would have access to everything. The house, the investment accounts, the life insurance policy I had taken out before we were even married, on which he was the sole beneficiary. He didn't need to kill me outright. He just needed me sick enough, confused enough, dependent enough that I couldn't fight back while he repositioned everything. He had almost pulled it off. I spent one day at my college roommate's apartment making calls. 2 calls specifically. The first was to Marcus, an attorney who had handled my parents' estate, and who I trusted completely. The second was to a woman named Detective Rhonda Hess, who had been recommended to me by Dr. Okafor with a very specific tone in her voice that told me this wasn't the first time she'd made that recommendation. Marcus told me not to go home. He told me not to contact my husband. He told me to let him handle everything and to trust the process even when it felt unbearably slow. He said those exact words. Trust the process. I wrote them on the back of my hand in ballpoint pen and looked at them about 40 times that day. Detective Hess moved faster than I expected. She was in her 50s, calm in the way that people who have seen everything tend to be calm, not cold, just unshakable. She told me that what I was describing was not uncommon. She said that phrase carefully too, the way Dr. Okafor had said intentional. These women were practiced at delivering devastating information without shattering the person holding it. Within 72 hours, Detective Hess had a warrant. The results from the search of our home kitchen were not ambiguous. A small glass bottle, unlabeled, tucked behind the coffee grinder he used every morning. Thallium sulfate solution. Not a gardening product, not a cleaning chemical. A deliberate purchase. My husband didn't know any of this yet. He thought I was still in the hospital. Still confused. Still too weak to be a threat. He had visited twice since that first night, both times performing the role of worried spouse with what I now recognized as the fluency of a practiced actor. He brought flowers the second time. He asked the nurses questions about my prognosis with an expression of deep concern. One of the nurses told me afterward that she thought he seemed very devoted. That word devoted sat in my stomach like a stone. Marcus called me on a Thursday morning with a very specific plan. He had spoken to Detective Hess. He had filed an emergency motion to freeze all joint assets and had a judge's signature on it before noon. My husband didn't know, and now we needed him to not know for just a little while longer, just long enough to walk himself into a room he couldn't walk back out of. The setup was this. Marcus would call my husband and tell him there was an urgent matter regarding my medical status and some financial paperwork that needed immediate attention. He would imply that I had taken a serious turn, that decisions needed to be made quickly, that there was a narrow window for him to act on the power of attorney before things became legally complicated. He would tell my husband to come to his office the next morning. I asked Marcus if he thought my husband would come. Marcus said he would be there before the office even opened. He was right. My husband arrived 18 minutes early. I watched him on the small monitor set up in the conference room adjacent to Marcus's office, where I was sitting with Detective Hess and a female officer named Tanya, whose job was specifically to be present if things escalated. My husband was wearing the charcoal blazer he saved for important meetings. He had gotten a haircut. He looked polished, prepared, optimistic. Marcus sat behind his desk and opened with sympathy. He told my husband that the situation was delicate. He said my condition had progressed and that there were questions about my long-term cognitive function. He said the word cognitive gently, watching my husband's face. I watched my husband's face too, on that monitor. I watched something flicker in his eyes that was not grief. Marcus said there were two paths forward. The first was the standard process, with a formal competency evaluation required before the power of attorney could be activated, which could take 3 to 6 months, and would flag an investigation given the unusual nature of my illness. My husband's jaw tightened. 3 to 6 months was not the answer he was looking for. Then Marcus paused. He sighed. He said there was a faster option. He said that if my husband could provide documentation, a written declaration, witnessed and signed attesting that I had shown signs of self-harm, ideation, or mental instability in the months prior to my hospitalization, the competency evaluation could be bypassed, and the POA could be activated within 48 hours. He pushed a single sheet of paper across the desk. I watched my husband pick it up. I watched him read it. I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes, the same eyes that had looked at me across a candlelit dinner table on our anniversary, the same eyes that had stood at an altar and said the words, "in sickness and in health," and I watched him reach for the pen. He didn't ask a single question about my well-being. He didn't hesitate. He signed his name at the bottom of a sworn statement, claiming that I had been mentally unstable, that I had talked about hurting myself, that my hospitalization was the result of my own deteriorating mental health, and he did it in under 30 seconds. He pushed the paper back across the desk and asked when the accounts would be unfrozen. Marcus looked up from the paper. He said, very quietly, "You can ask her yourself." The door to the conference room opened. I have thought about that moment many times since. I have tried to decide what I felt walking through that door. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't even anger. Not in any hot or satisfying way. It was something closer to clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you've been trying to read a blurry document for years and someone finally hands you the right prescription. I walked in. I sat down across from him. I put the digital recorder on the table between us. He stared at me the way people stare at things that cannot be real. His color drained. His hand, still holding the pen, went completely still. I said his name, just his name, nothing else. And then he did something I had not expected. He didn't rage. He didn't lunge. He laughed. A short, disbelieving, genuinely stunned laugh, and then he looked at me with what I can only describe as wounded indignation, as though I was the one who had done something wrong. He said I had always made everything so difficult. He said if I had just trusted him, if I had just put his name on the deed like a normal wife, none of this would have happened. He said he had done what he had to do because I had forced his hand. It was the logic of a man who had never once, in his entire life, accepted responsibility for a single thing. Detective Hess and Officer Tanya came through the door before he finished his sentence. He didn't come quietly. He argued all the way to the door, insisting this was a misunderstanding, insisting he wanted to call his lawyer, insisting I was the one who needed help. I sat in that chair and I watched him go, and I did not say another word. There was nothing left to say. Everything that needed to be said had already been said, signed, and recorded. The charges were substantial: felony poisoning, attempted murder, fraud, perjury. The DA told Marcus that given the physical evidence, the bottle found in our kitchen, the toxicology reports, the recorded confession, it was one of the strongest cases their office had seen in years. My husband called me from jail. Once. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail that was 2 minutes and 40 seconds long, and which I have never listened to. I know exactly what's in it. I know the shape of it. The apologies that aren't apologies. The explanations that are really accusations. The please and the I love you and the you know I never meant to hurt you. I deleted it without listening. Not in a dramatic moment of catharsis. Just practically. The way you delete a spam email you recognize on sight. The trial lasted 4 days. My husband's attorney tried to argue that the thallium was already present in our home from a previous tenant. A theory so weak that even the jury looked embarrassed for him. The toxicologist was on the stand for 3 hours and left no room for alternative interpretation. My medical records, Biscuit's medical records, the financial documents showing the life insurance policy, and my husband's mounting debt, it all told a story that didn't need any help from me. I testified on the second day. I sat in the witness stand and I answered every question in a clear voice, and I did not look at my husband unless I was directly describing something he had done. When I did look at him, I noticed something that I want to describe accurately, because I think it matters. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just smaller, like the space he had taken up in my life, the anxiety he had generated, the self-doubt he had seeded, the way I had been quietly reshaping myself for 4 years to accommodate his needs, and his moods had all been returned to me at once, and I was seeing him without all of that weight for the first time. He was sentenced to 22 years. With good behavior, he will serve a minimum of 18. He will be in his late 50s when he gets out, assuming he does. The court ordered him to pay restitution that he will never realistically be able to pay. His family, who had always treated me with the polite distance of people who sensed I was a problem, did not attend the sentencing. Neither did most of his friends. The ones who did came for the spectacle. After the verdict, I stood outside the courthouse in the February cold, and I felt the sun on my face, and I thought, I get to keep my life. That's the thing nobody tells you about surviving something like this. The gift isn't revenge. The revenge is almost incidental. The gift is the ordinary life you get to go back to. The morning coffee you make yourself, in your own kitchen. That is just coffee. The tremors in my hands that faded over 6 months of chelation therapy. The hair that grew back. Biscuit, who recovered fully, and is currently asleep on my feet as I write this. The gift is waking up and knowing that everything in your home is exactly as you left it, and nobody has touched it, and nobody ever will again without your permission. I sold the house. Not because I had to. Legally it was entirely mine and there was no question of that. But because I had made coffee in that kitchen for 4 years, and the muscle memory of handing him the cup was something I didn't want to undo slowly. One morning at a time. I sold it to a young couple who were moving to Atlanta for work, who walked through it with shining eyes and talked about which room would be the nursery. I handed them the keys and I meant it as a genuine offering. May nothing ever be wrong in this house. May it only ever be what it looks like. I want to talk to you about something that I haven't said out loud enough, because I think it's the part that actually matters. After everything came to light, people kept asking me why I hadn't seen it sooner. Not unkindly. Genuinely. Friends, co-workers, even Detective Hess. Gently. Over coffee one afternoon. How did I not know? Here is my honest answer. I knew something. I knew something was wrong in the constant, low-frequency way that you know a sound is present, even when you can't identify it. I had that feeling for 2 years. Maybe longer. And every time it surfaced, I did one of two things. I rationalized it, found an explanation that was less threatening than the true one. Or I blamed myself. I told myself I was too suspicious, too guarded, not trusting enough. I told myself I needed to work harder at believing in people. I had been trained, somewhere along the way, to interpret my own instincts as character flaws. I want you to hear this, because I think it might be the most important thing I can offer you. If you have a feeling, a persistent, returning, cannot quite name it feeling that something in your closest relationship is not right, that feeling is not a character flaw. It is information. Your nervous system is not broken. Your nervous system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The question is whether you will let yourself listen. I know the answer feels obvious from the outside. Of course you should listen. Of course you should investigate. But from inside the relationship, from inside the architecture of trust and shared history and love that even a toxic relationship contains because it does contain love, or something that performs love with enough accuracy that you cannot always tell the difference, it is not obvious at all. Leaving, or even questioning, feels like a kind of violence against everything you have built. Let me tell you what I learned. The first thing is this. Your instincts are not cruelty. Trusting your gut about someone is not a betrayal of them. It is an act of self-preservation, and self-preservation is not selfish. It is the minimum you owe yourself. The minimum. When the people who are supposed to love you treat your self-preservation as a problem to be managed, that is the signal, not the proof you may need more than a feeling for proof. But it is the signal to start looking. The second thing is, get a witness. I cannot overstate how important it was to have Marcus, to have Detective Hess, to have Dr. Okafor, people who saw what was happening and could reflect it back to me in language that I couldn't explain away. Isolation is a tool. The people who want to hurt you will almost always, consciously or not, work to separate you from the people who might help you see clearly. Pay attention to who in your life makes you feel smaller and more alone. Pay attention to who benefits from your isolation. The third thing, and this is the one that took me the longest to accept, is that love does not make harm acceptable. I loved my husband. I am almost certain, in some distorted and ultimately destructive way, that he loved me too, or loved what I represented, or loved the version of me that did not question or resist. That love was real, and it does not change what he did. Love is not a currency you can use to purchase someone's right to hurt you. You do not owe anyone your body, your health, your future, your sanity, not even someone you love, not even someone you chose. I have a small apartment now, on the north side of Atlanta, with a balcony that gets good afternoon light. I have Biscuit, who turns 11 in March and has developed opinions about which brand of treats is acceptable. I have Marcus, who sends me a brief text every few months to check in. I have Dr. Okafor, who cleared me completely last spring and hugged me in the hallway of her office in a way that was not particularly professional and was exactly what I needed. I have my roommate, who let me sleep on her couch and never once made me feel like a burden. I have my hair back. I have steady hands. I have a life that is, by most measures, fairly ordinary. I go to work. I make my own coffee. I take Biscuit on long walks in the evenings and think about nothing in particular. I have learned that ordinary is not a consolation prize. Ordinary is the whole point. Ordinary is what was almost taken from me. And ordinary is what I got back. And I will not spend a single day treating it as insufficient. My husband, I don't call him my ex-husband, because I refuse to use a word that implies I still consider our marriage a real thing that ended rather than a crime that was stopped, is in a state correctional facility, approximately 90 miles from Atlanta. I have no contact with him. I do not think about him often. When I do, it is usually because something small has triggered a memory, the specific smell of that charcoal blazer, or the sound of a coffee grinder in the morning, and I notice the memory and I let it pass through without grabbing it. Indifference is the finish line, not forgiveness, not resolution, not a tearful conversation where he finally understands what he did and says the right words. Indifference. The state in which someone who once occupied the center of your world has simply become irrelevant. It arrives slowly. It arrives without ceremony. You don't feel it happen. You just notice one day that you went an entire week without thinking about him, and then a month, and then you genuinely cannot remember the last time he occurred to you. That is freedom. Not the dramatic kind. The permanent kind. I'm telling you this because there is someone listening right now who is in the early stages of something that has not yet become undeniable. Who has the low-frequency feeling? Who is rationalizing? Who is blaming themselves for their own distrust? Who is 6 months or a year away from a doctor's office or a hospital, or a moment of terrible clarity that they are not yet allowing themselves to approach? I want you to approach it now. Not because it will be easy, not because the people who love you correctly will make it painless or fast, but because you are worth the approach, because your body is telling you something that your history and your love and your hope have not yet allowed you to hear, because the longer you wait, the more of you gets used up in the waiting. The tremors in my hands are gone. I had forgotten what steady felt like. I want you to remember.